The phone started ringing at 3:47 a.m., not the casual trill of a friend who forgot the time zone, but that thin, surgical tone that slices straight into bone. I was already awake, lying on top of the covers in the resort suite, counting the spaces between the slow, breathing hush of the ocean. A draft moved the balcony curtains like white lungs, inhaling, exhaling. Somewhere below, a couple laughed, bright, drunken, innocent, their happiness floating up the cliff like a balloon that hadn't realized yet how sharp the world can be. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't have to. I knew. Some knowledge doesn't arrive. It flowers inside you, black and sudden. I answered. "Your daughter is with us," a man said. His voice carried sand and smoke, lazy with the kind of power people mistake for certainty. "We want 10 million by tomorrow, or she dies." For a second, I only heard him breathing. It was close, intimate. He wanted me to hear his lungs, the heat behind his teeth, the wet proof of life pressing at the receiver. The room felt too still, too clean, like the silence before a gunshot. I sat up. The bed beside me was empty, pillow dented, blanket folded back. A small pink ribbon lay on the sheet like a lost petal. My daughter had worn it earlier, during the fireworks down by the water. She'd clapped hard and smiled with all her teeth, trying to catch sparks in her hands. 8 years old, soft arms, freckles that came alive when the sun kissed them. I kept my voice level. "Do you know who I am?" He chuckled. "You're another rich fool who thought Mexico was paradise." In the reflection on the sliding glass door, I saw myself, hair flattened from sleep, shoulders still broader than the years should allow. All the old things inside me woke up and stood at attention, the way wolves stretch before they run. "I spent 15 years as the Reaper for the CIA," I told him, softly. "I dismantled 47 organizations bigger than yours." The line went dead. I didn't move. I let the weight of the silence sit on my chest, a familiar animal resettling after the hunt. Outside, the sea kept whispering, patient, repetitive, like it was counting the dead. It's the same sound the ocean has made every time I buried someone I once loved. It's the same sound it made the day I promised myself to be done with who I used to be. I looked at the ribbon again. My throat felt like it had been lined with salt. "Baby?" a voice behind me said. My wife. The lamp clicked on, a soft amber. She was wrapped in the hotel robe, hair twisted into a careless knot that used to lose my place mid-sentence. "What's wrong? Who was that?" I turned the phone face down. Wrong number. Her eyes flicked to the empty bed. She didn't ask the obvious question, "Where is Ava?" And the absence of that question, that maternal reflex, dropped cold through me like a stone. She touched my arm. Her fingers were cool, delicate. "You're shaking," she said. "I'm fine." Below us, a wave broke and dragged gravel like a chain. 2 days earlier, I'd stepped out onto the same balcony and found her whispering into her phone. The breeze had been a little stronger. It played with the hem of her dress, turned her into a moving photograph. When I opened the door, she looked at me like someone had thrown a light at her face. Then she smiled too quickly and said it was her sister. She lowered her voice in that particular way people do when they want you to hear the performance of secrecy, not the content. I kissed her. I let it go. Or I pretended to. That's the difference between the person I am for my family and the person I had to be for my country. One lets things go, the other collects them like teeth in a bag. Now, at 3:49 a.m., the bag was clattering. I stood. "I'll check the pool deck. She might have fallen asleep on one of the chairs. You know how she is when she sneaks late-night hot chocolate." It was a test, a small one. If fear was true inside her, it would billow, fill the room, shove her out of the robe and into clothes. If fear was theater, it would look for its mark. She placed a palm on her chest. "Oh, yeah, good idea. Tell the staff to look. I'll call downstairs." Her breath hitched on call, a sound I've heard in interrogation rooms, a tiny accidental truth, not fear, recognition. I stepped into jeans, pulled on a shirt, and slid the balcony door open. The night wrapped me in a damp, salted shawl. I scanned the resort, dim path lights leading through palms, the long throat of the pool catching the ghost of moonlight, the beach a soft bruise of black and silver. In the distance, the wink of a lighthouse, faithful, stubborn. I pulled a chair over and climbed onto the railing to look down the cliff toward the road. A thin strip of tarmac lay quiet under the slow roll of dawn. 3 SUVs had passed this way in the last hour. I knew because I'd sat out here earlier, unable to sleep. Men who do what I used to do don't really sleep. We rehearse. I came back inside and felt the room the way a surgeon feels a chest cavity. Gentle, clinical, compelled. Ava's small sandal by the door. Her coloring book half open to a page of blue palm trees. A smear of chocolate at the corner of a mug. All these little anchors pulling me through a present that wanted to become a storm. My wife stood at the window, arms crossed, staring out like she could sculpt the horizon with her mind. "They'll find her," she said, not turning. "Security here is..." "Good," I said. "Yeah." I reached for the minibar, palmed a bottle of water, and used its reflection to watch her watch me. When you spend a decade reading micro-movements on faces that would rather be dead than honest, this part becomes instinct. Track the blink rate, the way the lips park themselves, the direction the feet point when the head pretends to care. Her phone, face down on the table, vibrated, a sharp little insect noise. She flinched. We locked eyes. A normal wife, a normal mother. In a normal emergency, she'd reach for the phone like it was oxygen. Instead, she let it twitch itself to death. "I'll go talk to the front desk," I said, and my voice came out smooth like I was reminding her we still had dinner reservations to make. "You stay here. If she wanders back, I don't want her to panic." She nodded too fast. "Of course, yes, I'll stay." I kissed her temple. She smelled like the shampoo the resort puts in glass bottles. Coconut, something floral, something expensive trying to cover something simple. Beneath it, the smallest trace of sweat. Fear. Or effort. In the hallway, my pulse settled into a low drumline. The elevator mirrored me on all sides. The man I had promised my daughter I didn't have to be anymore. I tapped my phone awake, pulled up the tethering tool I should have deleted years ago, and mirrored her device to mine in less than 30 seconds. She kept her passcode simple. Our anniversary reversed. People always think the clever thing is the safe thing. It rarely is. The lobby was a soft aquarium glow. The night manager straightened when he saw me, the aggressive politeness of 5-star hospitality snapping into place. I kept my questions gentle and empty. "Seen a little girl? Red pajamas, pink ribbon?" He shook his head, stammered apologies, offered to call security. I nodded like a father who believed the world was fundamentally helpful. I let him see my hands tremble. While he made calls, the mirrored feed spooled up on my screen. Messages scrolled past like fish behind glass. Routine things. Friends, photos, a recipe, a school mom thread. Then a contact with no name, just a number. Carlos. Threads pinned and unpinned. Audio files deleted 5 minutes after sending. A set of bank screenshots, each with the same caption, "He'll finally pay." My mouth tasted like a battery. I swallowed hard enough to hurt. The night manager hung up. Sorry again. "We'll do a sweep, sir. We'll check cameras. I'll notify the guard posts." "Thank you," I said. "I'm sure she's just hiding." I made my face soften like Hope was an animal I didn't want to scare. Back in the elevator, I watched a video she'd recorded yesterday from the balcony. Just ocean. A minute long. At the 7-second mark, there was a fragment of another voice, not hers, a man's. A single word. Tomorrow. The rest was wind. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't arrive with symbols. It drips in, one wet footstep at a time, until you realize the floor has been flooded for days. I walked past our door without entering, went out through the fire stairs to the service lot, stood between two vans, and called a favor I had hoped to never cash. A whisper of a man answered. A voice from a different life, one that smelled like cold coffee and gun oil. I gave him the number. He gave me a shape. A tower, a triangulation, a cluster of calls that had occurred at the exact second my wife had run to grab ice near the back gate 2 nights ago. Coincidence is a word we invent to comfort ourselves. I pocketed the phone and stood very still until the vans around me regained their neutrality. The sky was lightening at the edges, a bruise coming to terms with the day. Birds started up in the palms, oblivious, faithful, utterly heartless. When I opened the suite door, she was on the balcony, robe drawn tight, looking small against the enormous water. She turned at the sound. Any news? Not yet. I moved past her, left the door open so the ocean could keep speaking. She touched my back. Small, testing. Should we call the police? I looked at her for a long moment. The skin under her eyes had the softness of sleeplessness. Her mouth was a little swollen from biting. She was almost convincing. Not yet, I said. She nodded and looked down, relief too quick, too bright. I went to the bed and picked up the pink ribbon. The knot had loosened. When I was a boy, my mother tied my shoelaces in double bows that never came undone. If I yanked too hard, they only cinched tighter. I taught Ava the same knot. It was a point of pride with her. My bows don't slip, Daddy. This one had slipped. I wrapped the ribbon around my finger until the tip turned white, then let it go. My phone buzzed. A new mirrored message lighting the screen in my palm from a chat named C. A sentence popped up, casual as weather. Everything's set for tonight. He won't see it coming. As the machine hissed, I typed 5 words to a different life, to a different man, to a service that still answers when I break my own vows. I need all of Carlos. By sunrise, the blueprint had started sketching itself in the back of my eyes. Access roads, blind angles, the behavior of men who believe they are alone. 3 SUVs, 4 men on the sand, 1 handler at the perimeter with a radio, thumb that taps when he lies. I should have felt fear. Instead, I felt something colder, older, more precise. Not anger, not yet. The first cut of betrayal, the way it takes the air out of even the biggest lungs. I looked at the coffee my wife set down, the steam ribboning up like a blessing. We'll find her, she said, placing her hand on mine. The warmth of her fingers spread across my knuckles, tender, practiced. I turned my palm and took her hand like a husband. I squeezed once in a rhythm that used to mean I love you. Her pulse jumped against my thumb. In the quiet between us, a truth moved into focus that I didn't want to name. I saw the night 2 weeks ago when she came in late and laughed too fast. I saw the way she had begun to praise me a little too much, the way people praise police officers at a traffic stop. I saw the message again. He'll finally pay. I let her hand go. Stay inside, I said gently. Don't call anyone. If Ava comes back on her own, I don't want her scared by strangers. She swallowed. Of course. I pocketed the pink ribbon, and as I did, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. The same thin tone, the same surgical blade. I didn't answer this time. I walked out, the ocean at my back, the hotel hallway long and soft and carpeted, like a throat swallowing me whole. Somewhere, a door clicked shut. Somewhere else, a maid's cart rattled like distant dice.
On the elevator down, I caught my reflection one more time. I thought of my daughter's fingers sticky with melted marshmallow reaching for mine last night under those fireworks. I thought of the woman who had once taught me how to let my shoulders unclench. I thought of the man on the phone asking for 10 million like it was a weather report. When the doors opened to the parking terrace, dawn had finally burned a seam along the horizon. The world was waking. I wasn't sure if I wanted it to. The next move would be careful, surgical. There would be no debris. There never was, not when I was the one holding the blade. And in the space where the sun touched the edge of the water, I made myself say it. This wasn't random. It was scripted. And the hand that had written the first line was sleeping in my bed. I stepped into the light with the oldest part of me at the wheel. I drove like a man with no patience for lights. The coastal road was still rinsing off the night. Salt smelled thick and honest in the windows when I cracked them. People waved from patios like they were greeting a stranger who'd wandered into someone else's life, and for a second I wondered if what I was doing looked monstrous from the outside. Then the knot in my chest tightened and I turned the radio down. There's no soundtrack to this kind of work, just the engine and your breathing and the little clicks your mind makes when it lines up facts. Back at the rental office of someone I owed favors to, a slim, nervous man named Javier, who'd saved my life in a bar fight that was technically legal, he slid into a chair with the privacy of an interrogation room. He'd been paying back the favor for years in small ways: taps, a driver, a place to stash a shadow. He handed me a coffee like an offering and tapped his cigarette into the ashtray with a nervous rhythm that sounded like a metronome tapped wrong. "You sure about this?" he asked. His eyes flicked to the window where dawn had melted into a thin gray. "I'm sure for the first time I've been in a long time." I didn't want to tell him about the ribbon. That detail belongs to a father who still believes in bedtime songs. I needed names and edges. I needed to make noise in places that make men move. He tapped the keyboard. His fingers were quick and apologetic. Within 20 minutes, he had a mesh. Call records, a triangulation of towers, the little habitual things criminals forget, like keeping their burner number active for the therapy of a late-night boast. 3 SUVs, as I thought. The handler's number pinged from a tower 2 miles south of where we were. A pattern, simple and ugly. "You want them picked up?" Javier asked, eyes hard. "No." I said the word like I meant it. "I want them distracted." He shrugged. Different favor. I showed him the mirror feed I'd taken earlier from my wife's phone. A collage of messages, screenshots of small transfers, a clipped audio file where a man's voice said one word, "Mañana." The timestamp matched the moment she said she was calling a sister. Javier's jaw thinned. "You want revenge. I want my daughter home. The two are cousins and men like me. They're bedfellows." He tapped a few keys and sent a chain of encrypted messages. Within an hour, a cluster of people I used to know by the smell of their cologne pulled taut and moved into action. Not because they trusted me anymore, because some debts are older than fear. I stayed in motion. I never sat in one seat for long. I checked in with the hotel manager 3 times, asked the cleaning staff about late-night noises, paced the pool deck until my knees ached. Each time I returned to the room, the pink ribbon watched me from where I'd left it on the dresser, a witness with no power. At 2 p.m., I had enough to draw a line. Names, faces, weak points. A lieutenant who liked mornings at a coffee stand by the marina. A handler who smoked menthols and kept a tattoo of a swallow that never quite finished its wing. I sent the lieutenant a single picture. No words. Just a photograph taken, carefully, casually, outside a private elementary school, the kind with a chain link and a flagpole. It showed him picking up a child, his bag slung the wrong way. The world we live in is starved for surprises. To see yourself in the lens where you didn't know someone watched is an animal thing. It makes people fold. By 4 p.m., chatter began to sputter on the networks. Guys who'd been long quiet started calling into old lines. Names that didn't belong together suddenly shared a table. The cartel lives in bravado and the illusion of permanence. Take away the illusion, and they start to bleed coordination. At 5:23 p.m., my phone buzzed. The number from the morning, thin and wrong, lit my screen. The voice was different now, edged with a small panic that someone had pressed into him without leaving a bruise. "Who are you?" he demanded. I let him feel the question like cold water. I didn't say my name. I let the silence do the work. He talked anyway, because when men fear their routine, they confess to strangers. "Listen, Carlos, he'll pay. The boss will—" "You used my daughter as bait," I interrupted. The words were not loud. They hung like a verdict. There was a long breath on the other end. I could hear a chair scrape. "You can pay," the man said finally. "We'll negotiate. 10. Negotiation is for people who intend to trade in good faith. You don't. You trade in theater." I clicked the call off before he could answer. The line died with his breath. It's funny how fast a well-hung criminal collapses when the light grazes the hinge. Not all of them, of course. Some are chisels of habit, but most are papermen with metal teeth. I went back to the room and sat in the chair by the window and watched my wife in the bed, smaller than she had ever been to me, scrolling something with the same absent intensity a gambler uses on a slot machine. She said she was watching the news, but the way her thumbs moved told me the truth. She was composing a life that had been forbidden to her, a ledger of receipts and lies.
I didn't approach. My moves had a rhythm now, one I knew like the lines of my own hand. I called an old friend in federal customs, a man who'd once warned me about a shipment that had been meant to disappear forever. He returned a favor with a list of accounts tied to Carlos. Another contact, a temperamental local detective who owed me a childhood debt, agreed to make a call that would suddenly make the lieutenant's men reconsider loyalties. Small tremors, lateral pressure, the kind that collapses a house of cards. I printed everything. Phone logs, bank statements, the picture to the lieutenant with its metadata, my notes, timestamps in the margins like a surgeon marking where to cut. Then I folded the packet and slid it under a thin stack of my wife's neatly folded shirts so it would be found when she reached for something ordinary and instead found proof. Around 9:30, I texted her, "I'll handle it. Stay inside, don't call anyone." Her reply came quick, 2 letters and a period. Okay. We teach our children little rules like always say please and look both ways. Men like us teach ourselves rules that are less charitable. Don't panic, measure your breath. Do not make the small mistakes that are a luxury of the frightened. I kept moving. At midnight, I mapped a route to a warehouse outside of town, gray concrete, the kind that smells like rain even when the sky is dry. Someone with money and a grudge rents those places. Someone with secrets hides behind them. I walked through the loaded dark, watching for eyes, listening for the small animal sounds that people make when they avoid one another. In the far corner, too much light focused on too little, Carlos, leaning on a pilfered crate like a man who thought he'd already won. He was younger up close, less theatrical. His swagger looked borrowed. He had a scar at his jaw I recognized as the mark of a bad debt. "You shouldn't have dragged a girl into this," I said, in the voice I use for breaking things that have already been shattered. Carlos blinked. "You don't understand. She promised." "Promises mean nothing when you use a child as currency," I said. He blinked again, and in that pause I tasted a plan forming. He reached for something at his belt, a reflex. His hand had the wrong name for the thing he thought would save him. I did not draw first. I never have in these rooms. Instead, I let the warehouse settle around us, let the humming of a distant refrigeration unit be the metronome of his decision. "I have your whole world on a string," I told him, "not because I want to hurt you, because I want you to feel the honest weight of fear for the first time." He laughed then, small and brittle. "You think you can—" "You left tracks," I said. "You used a woman who sleeps in my bed as a ledger. That's how I found you." His laugh died. For a second, the warehouse space bent like a held breath. I thought of my daughter, asleep in a blanket I'd wrapped her around earlier, the way her chest rose like a small, steady tide. I thought of the pink ribbon in the bow I used to tie so tight it never came loose. Carlos reached out with both hands then, not at my throat, but at his own face, as if to wipe away the thing he'd allowed to happen. "Please," he whispered. "Please," she said. I cut him off. "You get one thing," I said. "You get to tell the truth to men who will listen. After that, you get what you made for yourself." He told me everything. The handler, the pickup, the motel, details I fed to a phone that wasn't mine. A phone that belonged to a friend who kept score in a ledger law can read. As he spoke, I keyed the numbers into a contact list that would make his life compress into moments of panic. I let him think confession would buy him a favor. It might. Later. Not now. When I left the warehouse with my daughter in the trunk of a car I'd borrowed, sleeping like the small god of my life, I felt the shape of things changing. Not because I'd outmaneuvered them, because I'd recognized who had handed the script to them to read. Back at the resort, I walked through the door with Ava asleep against my shoulder. The room was quiet. My wife sat on the bed, fingers picking at the hem of her robe, eyes red from something like grief or calculation. Sometimes the two are indistinguishable. "You kept your promise," she said, in that voice people use when they can't tell lies from prayers. I set Ava on the bed like you place a relic. Her breath was even, the ribbon back in her hair, a small, defiant knot. "Why?" I asked my wife, not yet accusing. Accusing is a blunt tool. I wanted to watch how the light fell on her face when it was asked properly. She stared at the floor. "She needed the money," she said, and then louder, "You don't understand. Your debts, the clinic, your savings. Carlos said he would—" "You made her bait. You let my daughter be a line in your ledger." She lifted her head. Her face was an atlas of choices. He promised he would. Promises. Men like us learn the difference. Some promises are contracts, others are traps. She had written in the wrong ink. At that moment, a new call came through. A number I recognized, thin and trembling, the cartel man. His voice was quieter than before, threaded with a small, astonished terror. "Who are you?" he asked again. I turned away from my wife. I let the phone ring once, twice, and then stopped it. I didn't want to hear the excuses. I wanted to watch consequences land where they should.
I sat down and put my hands on my daughter's small knees. She murmured something in sleep and curled toward my chest like a question seeking an answer. I wrapped an arm around her and let my other hand rest on the packet I'd slid under my wife's shirts, the paper that would split the room like a seam. The game had shifted. It wasn't about ransom anymore. It was about who we would become after the lie. And as the evening turned to a night that felt both empty and full of knives, I realized there was one move left I had not yet made, one that would close the loop or open a trap. I looked at my wife. I looked at my sleeping daughter. I dialed a number I had not called in years, one that would not appear in any polite record. When the line answered, a voice I hadn't heard in a long time said two words that tasted like home and like war. "I'm ready." When I called the number I hadn't used in years, the line answered with that clipped professional calm I once carried like a second uniform. "You sure?" the voice asked. "No name, just the shape of a man who keeps favors cataloged by consequence?" "I am," I said. "There are deals you make when the world is softer. Then there are the cold bargains you make when someone has used the thing you love as currency." I drove to a federal safe house that smelled like coffee and old paperbacks. The man who opened the door, Garcia, looked the same as he did 10 years ago, only slower, like someone who's learned patience is more lethal than speed. He greeted me without questions. The look in his eyes was the only language left. "I have what you asked for," I said, placing the packet on the table like a confession. He skimmed, his face a map of no surprises. He didn't need to be convinced that a cartel man was involved. He needed the clean threads. Timestamps, screenshots, a footprint that matched the boot prints they despise. Proof the world recognizes. They'll move tonight, he said, but once we go, there's no turning back. That's the funny thing about choices. They don't ask for permission to change you. They simply change you. We laid the plan out in a room with a whiteboard and coffee rings, small men and women whose job is to make disorder kneel. The federales would leak a rumor to the lieutenant's men about a raid on a warehouse south of town. Carlos and the handler would move their people to protect a shipment. The lieutenant would panic and run for his family. The handler, when he saw his boss's men scattered, would fold. Law funnels the chaos of criminals into nets. I provided the bait, a single innocent truth. A photograph of the lieutenant at his child's school, circulated as if it had been caught by a parent who suddenly felt betrayed. Pride is all most of these men have. Stab pride, they bleed order. The federales moved at dusk. I watched from a van 2 streets away while agents in unmarked jackets made their way through the warehouse lot. I had Ava on my lap. She'd woken when I picked her up from the trunk and climbed against me like a small animal, claiming the last warmth in a cold room. She rubbed her eyes, then saw the commotion through the van window. Floodlights, men scurrying, the sudden sound of radios. She smiled like an animal who knows only that the world is loud and interesting. My wife watched all of it from the hotel room across town, or she would have if she hadn't already left. I'd left the packet where she'd find it, and like someone who took a long time to realize their reflection was a stranger, she resolved to be gone. There was a note left on the counter. I'm sorry. I can't stay. No plea, no plan. Only an apology folded like a receipt. She had taken the things she could carry. Cash, a small bag, lipstick. The rest she left. The robe, the pretense, the life we stitched together with numbers and small white lies. By the time the radio chatter spiked into panic, Carlos was already sweating in the center of his own unraveling. His men were running like the script they'd been handed had burned their lines. The handler on the perimeter, menthol smoke in his mouth and the swallow tattoo peeking from his sleeve, saw the lieutenant's phone blow up with photos and calls, and with a single animal decision, he turned his back on the motel they'd chosen as a fallback.
I didn't have to fire a shot. I never wanted to. The federales do their work with paperwork and patience. They wrapped a loop of legal steel around Carlos, they froze accounts, they flagged contracts, they whispered his name into databases that have teeth. Within hours, men who thought themselves sovereign found themselves naked at the mercy of processes they never respected. Men who shot first and asked questions never had to learn the vocabulary of law. Now they did. Carlos was detained quietly, like someone removed from a stage in the dead of night. His wide eyes slid to me one last time, surprised, yes, but less by my presence than by the sudden absence of the safety he'd assumed. "You could have paid," he tried, when the metal bit his wrist. It was the same sentence I'd heard earlier in different mouths. I let the room hold that small, pathetic sentence. "You used a child," I said. The sentence was final, practical. The law took him in its hands and squeezed. When they escorted him out, grunt men in dark jackets flanking him like a small ceremony of consequences, I felt the absurd lightness of someone who'd removed a splinter. It's a small relief. It doesn't make the wound vanish. It only stops the infection. Back at the suite, Ava slept in a mound of blankets on the bed, the pink ribbon back where it belonged. I watched her chest rise. Perfect, calm. I considered how easily things at that age fit back together. A kiss, a story, the sound of a father singing the wrong words in the wrong key. The ease of it made the rest of the night bitter with contrast. My wife's note left a smudge I could not ignore. She hadn't run because she feared Carlos. She had run because she knew the line she'd crossed. Because the ledger she'd created couldn't be uncoupled from an honest life. The money she thought would buy solace had bought only more secrets. She had chosen cowardice over the messy honesty of consequence. I waited for her to return. I don't know why. Maybe I was waiting to watch her choose apology properly. Maybe I was looking for the dramatic collapse that would fit the narrative I wanted to write about what betrayal deserves. She never came back. News cycles are merciless. By morning, local outlets whispered about a minor cartel disruption. By noon, someone online posted a grainy photo of Carlos being led into a van. Comments swelled. Sympathy, outrage, the kinds of small moralities people trade like tokens. Ava's teacher called, then texted, then asked if she could come by. I let the neighborhood fold around us with casseroles and offers. I realized somewhere between a late-night visit to the marina and 2 messy loads of laundry that what I'd dismantled wasn't only their plan. I'd dismantled my marriage. I'd dismantled a version of myself that thought I could compartmentalize violence into a drawer and never let it bleed into the family room. People ask whether I felt anything when I watched the federales take Carlos away. They expect fury, triumph, perhaps some small cinematic rage. What I felt was the odd, clean thing men feel when a long job is done properly. Clarity. The world had been returned to a shape that matched its rules. The people who had used a child as a tool were being sorted into a system that had teeth. But justice is a practical beast. It feeds on process and time. It does not hand you back trust. It does not put together what was broken with one expert hand. It gives you the truth. And sometimes the truth is an unglamorous pile of items, bank transfers, audio files, receipts. Then it steps back. Ava woke the next morning with the kind of joy that is both terrifying and blessed. She wanted pancakes and to tell me every detail of a dream where we had a dragon. I made pancakes and listened. She put the ribbon back in her hair and asked if we could go to the park. I said yes. I think about my wife often, not with the fever of revenge, which is cheap and ugly, but with a strange, steady grief. People leave for many reasons, and sometimes leaving is the only telling of truth they can stomach. I don't know where she went. I keep the note folded in a drawer under Ava's old drawings, where the paper smells faintly of her perfume, something floral that never matched the woman she became in these last months. In the months that followed, the federales closed cases. Carlos's men turned on themselves in small, legal ways. Testimony for leniency, a confession in exchange for safety. The lieutenant lost custody of the illusion of loyalty and kept only the tattered remains of a life that now smelled like regret. The handler fled the country with a bucket of cash and a tattoo of a half swallow. These are not romantic endings. They are administrative. Ava grows like something tender and invincible. She asks questions about truth that surprise me with their bluntness. "Why did Mommy leave?" she asked once in the grocery aisle, fingers wrapped around a rubber duck. I told her the only honest thing I had. Sometimes people make choices that hurt others. We do what we can to keep each other safe. She nodded, then asked if we could go feed the ducks. The world for her is still a place where bread and water and sunshine make sense. For me, it's a ledger that must be balanced. At night, when the house is quiet and the ocean outside remembers old crates and older promises, I sometimes hear a phone ring in the dark. It is never the same number. It is always the same sound. An invitation. I do not answer as I used to. I don't run to fists or bullets, but I answer because some men cannot stop answering the call. Not out of duty, out of knowing what happens if they don't.
I taught myself to dismantle others to make the world safer once. I never thought I'd have to dismantle my own life to find the same safety. There is a cost to that clarity, one I pay in small ways: missed anniversaries, a hollow where a partner should be, the quiet ache of a trust that will not return. The pink ribbon still sits in a drawer by my bedside, looped into a neat bow. I tie it in Ava's hair and tell myself that some knots, when tied with care, hold. Some knots, when tied with betrayal, never come undone. I pick up the phone when it rings sometimes, but now, when I do, I listen for the animal in the voice,
the fear, the lie, the shape of recognition, and I answer only in a voice I know is mine.